Hello everyone, and welcome back to another GIS lecture video. And in this GIS lecture video, I want to cover the concepts of latitude and longitude. So we'll talk about what they mean, how they're recorded, and then we'll go dig deeper into how they're recorded when we talk about decimal degrees and degrees, minutes, seconds in the next video. So hopefully most of you are at least somewhat familiar with the concept of latitude and longitude. But what we're going to talk about in this video is dig deeper into what they mean, how they're actually measured in terms of what they actually are depicting, and some of the symbology and terms that we use to talk about them. So first of all, I want to throw out a couple of pieces of terminology. So we have latitude, sometimes denoted with something that looks like this, this is called phi. And this is what is known as the angular measure north or south of the equator. If you don't fully know what angular measure and what is and what the equator is, we'll talk about those in just a second. I just want to get these two terms put out there. So latitude is measured in phi. We also have something called longitude, which is sometimes denoted with something that looks like this. That is called lambda. So you'll see these two symbols used in a lot of equations. Phi for latitude, lambda for longitude. So this is the angular measure east or west of the prime meridian. And I'm going to highlight equator and prime meridian, as those are going to be their own terms. So let's talk about what we mean when we say latitude, when we say angular measure with the equator, and what we mean when we say longitude as an angular measure of the prime meridian. So let's go ahead and imagine for a second that the world that the Earth is represented as a sphere, and then we've cut the Earth in half, or into quarters, once through the center of the Earth here, and once through the center of the Earth here. Okay? So just to recap, this is Earth. And I'm going to copy this a couple of times so that we have it in the vault for later. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to describe some terminology. So we cut the Earth in half here. This line here, right? This is the equator, right? So the equator is the plane that divides the Earth in half to a north half and a south half. So relative to the equator, right? Do this in orange, right? We have the northern hemisphere, and then south of the equator, right, we have the southern hemisphere. So the equator cuts the Earth in half, north and south. Then, right, we have this line here, that cut the Earth in half this way. Right, so if we have that line, what we have is we have the eastern hemisphere and we have the western hemisphere. Okay, and we have the two dividing lines being the equator and the prime meridian. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy our globe again so we don't have as much stuff all over it. Let's move down just a little bit here. Give ourselves a new copy. So let's talk about latitude, also known as phi. Right, so latitude, as we just mentioned, right, is the angular measure relative to north or south of the equator. And so we know from our previous diagram, right, that this line right here is the equator. So to measure latitude, let's imagine we cut the Earth in half like a grapefruit, and we end up with something like this. Oh, that's a really, really lumpy circle. We'll go with it. Right, so in this case, right, we're looking sort of cross-sectionally. So this straight line right here is the equator. Right, this point right here is the center of the Earth. Right, and you as a person are standing, say, right here on the outside of this is you. Let's make that a different color. How about we use blue? Right. So this is you. So we have the equator, the center of the Earth, and you. What latitude is measuring is measuring this angle, which I'm going to draw in yellow, from the center of the Earth relative to the equator to you. Right? This angle right here, this is phi, or latitude, right? So we cut the Earth in half, so we're looking at it sort of, we cut it in half top to bottom, and we're looking at it, you could say we cut it along the prime meridian, right? So the equator is now a horizontal line running through the center. What latitude is measuring, or phi as it's denoted in equations, is the angle between where the equator touches the Earth, the center of the Earth, and where you are measuring your position, right? That angle is phi. So let's take a second and talk about some properties of latitude. Let's go ahead and scroll down first. I want to be able to see this. So what we can do is, right, if we start here, right, we increase. And if we get to a point here, right, where this angle, let me actually redraw the picture. Right, So if you are on the equator, right, you have a 0-degree latitude, right? Because the angle between you and the equator with the center of the Earth is 0. So the first property of latitude is latitude is 0 degrees at the equator. Right. So now, right, so imagine you're walking along the Earth. Maybe you're Superman, you're flying along the Earth, and you get to the North Pole. So you would then be here. That is not the most contrasting color. Let's try gray. Right, you are now here. So the angle that you make with the equator is a right angle, right? You would be 90 degrees. Now, if you were to go, say, this way, so now let's say you move a little bit and now you're here, right? Instead of measuring the angle from here to here, convention is what we do is we measure from here to here, right? So you'd actually be less than 90. So at the equator at 0, you progress up and up and up and up and up until you hit the North Pole, in which case you're 90. And then as you progress down again, right, if you're Superman flying around the world, right, you progress up to 90, down from 90, till you hit 0 again on this side. So the maximum latitude is 90. So we've flown halfway around the world, right? We've flown from the United States to China. We've flown halfway around the world. Boom. Now what happens if we want to fly back, but we fly around the other half? So if instead of flying here and then back again, what if we start here and we go south from the equator instead of north? Well, as we go south, right, we eventually will get to here. Right, this is 90 degrees, right? Now, but we're on the other side of the world from this 90 degrees. How do we denote that? Well, up here, right, because we're north of the equator, this gets an N. Because we're south of the equator, this gets an S. Or, and you'll see this pop up in equations, south of the equator gets denoted as a negative 90. Okay? So that's the third key property of latitude, right? It's 0 at the equator, its maximum is 90. North of the equator, denoted with N, degrees N is positive. South of the equator, denoted with degrees S, is negative. All right, so that's how we differentiate a maximum of 90 north and south, N and S, positive, negative. So hopefully that makes sense. In the next video, we'll take a brief look at latitude, which follows much the same principle. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.